What happens when a friend you've trusted for decades suddenly turns away? The shock is not just emotional, it's a ripple that spreads through families, businesses, and entire communities. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild, and the consequences can be far-reaching. For American dairy farmers, Mexico was more than a market. It was a partner, a lifeline. Generations of farmers relied on this relationship, building their livelihoods on a steady flow of dairy products crossing the border. The partnership was woven into the fabric of rural America. In the summer of 2025, that relationship shattered overnight. The flow of U.S. milk, cheese, and yogurt to Mexico slowed, then stopped. Trucks that once bustled with activity sat idle, and factories that hummed with production fell silent. Officially, new regulations were to blame. But to farmers, it felt like betrayal, a deliberate choice by a friend to look elsewhere. The sense of abandonment was palpable, as if years of cooperation had been erased with a single decision. The shock was immediate. This wasn't a minor dispute, it was the loss of the U.S. dairy industry's most important export market, worth billions. The economic blow was swift, but the emotional toll was just as severe, leaving many to question their future. Farm communities from Wisconsin to California were left reeling. How could such a stable partnership vanish so quickly? The uncertainty spread, affecting not just farmers but truck drivers, factory workers, and small-town businesses. The story of this dairy breakup is one of political maneuvering, economic retaliation, and real pain for those caught in the crossfire. Behind every policy decision are real people, struggling to adapt to a new reality. It's a stark reminder, international friendships can be fragile, and decades of goodwill can be undone in an instant. The ties that bind nations are as vulnerable as the people who depend on them. The alliance that once defined North American dairy trade is broken, leaving everyone to wonder what comes next. In the aftermath, the search for answers and hope has only just begun. For more than 3 decades, Mexico stood as the bedrock of U.S. dairy exports, the loyal customer whose demand kept countless American farms thriving, even in tough times. This partnership was more than just business, it was a lifeline that shaped the very landscape of rural America. American farmers didn't just ship products, they adapted, crafting cheeses and milk powders to suit Mexican tastes. This cross-border collaboration generated billions in revenue and created thousands of jobs, weaving together the economies and communities of both nations. When domestic prices dropped, Mexico's unwavering appetite for U.S. dairy acted as a safety net. It gave farmers the confidence to invest, expand their herds, and plan for a future that seemed secure and prosperous. At its peak, before the collapse, Mexico was buying a full tenth of all U.S. dairy exports, over $3 billion every year. Dairy products with American labels filled Mexican supermarket shelves, a testament to the scale of this trade. Day after day, convoys of trucks loaded with American dairy rumbled south, crossing the border as a living symbol of trust, cooperation, and economic interdependence between the two countries. This golden age fostered a sense of stability and optimism among U.S. dairy farmers, a belief that their hard work and international partnerships would always keep them secure. But that sense of security, as it turned out, was fragile. The U.S. dairy industry placed enormous faith in this cross-border relationship, convinced that mutual benefit and shared interests would ensure its longevity, no matter the challenges. But when the tides turned, that trust was shattered. The foundation of their businesses, built over decades, crumbled almost overnight, leaving farmers to face an uncertain and daunting future. The end didn't come with a trade war, but with paperwork. In 2025, Mexico imposed strict new food safety rules, creating a wall for U.S. dairy. Shipments that once crossed easily were now rejected. Meanwhile, Mexico struck a $3.2 billion dairy deal with Canada. Canada, long shielded by protectionist policies, suddenly had a massive new export market. Mexico's move was strategic, retaliation for U.S. tariffs, but through regulations, not open conflict. The U.S. couldn't easily fight back. Bureaucracy had become a weapon. For Canada, it was a windfall. Their dairy industry ramped up to meet Mexico's demand, reshaping the continent's dairy landscape. American farmers, meanwhile, watched their shipments stall as Canadian producers seized the opportunity. The closure of the Mexican market hit American farms hard. For many, it was a catastrophe. Family farms already struggling faced canceled contracts and plummeting prices as surplus milk flooded the domestic market. Years of building relationships with Mexican buyers vanished overnight, replaced by panic and despair. The political context stung even more. President Trump's tariffs, meant to protect American interests, had backfired. Mexico and Canada forged a new alliance, leaving the U.S. out. Farmers were left with mounting losses, forced to sell at a loss or dump milk entirely. The dream of passing the farm to the next generation faded, replaced by the threat of foreclosure. The Great Milk Betrayal of 2025 did more than devastate an industry. It redrew North America's alliances, shaking the very foundation of trust that had held the continent together for decades. What began as a crisis in dairy quickly spiraled into a political and economic earthquake, leaving communities reeling and governments scrambling to adapt. The USMCA partnership fractured, with Mexico and Canada forming a new economic bond that excluded the US for the first time in a generation. The continent's trade table had an empty seat, and the rules of engagement were rewritten overnight. This wasn't just about dairy, it signaled a broader realignment, as America's neighbors built a new order without it. New trade routes emerged and old agreements were left to gather dust, as the US found itself on the outside looking in. American farmers now scramble for new markets, squeezed by protectionism at home and abroad. Once the backbone of rural communities, they now face uncertainty, forced to adapt or risk being left behind in a rapidly changing landscape. The image of a North American family sharing a table is gone. What was once a symbol of unity and abundance has become a memory, replaced by division and doubt. Now, two sit together, while the third sits alone. The sense of togetherness has fractured, leaving one to wonder if the bonds can ever be restored. The bonds of trust are broken, and the future of continental cooperation is uncertain. Suspicion and hesitation have replaced the easy confidence of the past. When your allies stop buying from you and start buying from each other, is it still your table? Or have you simply become a guest in your own home, watching as the world moves on without you?